Okay, today's lecture is going to be dealing with blocks and block editing. Um, and this is, find this information in week 4. So blocks are going to be a really important topic as you get into Civil 3D. We're going to see that it's utilized quite a bit, not so much that you'll be maybe creating them in Civil, but you'll actually be utilizing them. So understanding a little bit about blocks and how they work is important. So we'll be looking at several key commands. As you see here, we've got block, insert, explode, W-block, minsert, base. Dynamic blocks are another topic, and you can also have another subset of things called attributes, which we're not going to get into this semester. But we're going to cover those major ones that I talked about. So now you need to look at your lecture handouts. You have a demonstration drawing, which we're going to have you open up. There's a block command PDF. Just shows you, if we open that up, you'll see this is the actual block command, or it's sometimes referred to as bmake. And then this is the insert command. This is the older insert command. Dialog box, I'm going to show you both because sometimes it's easier to use this than it is their newer one. They have a palette that they use. And then this is dealing with dynamic blocks, which we're not going to get into for the block editor. Might briefly touch on this, but in general, we won't need to deal with that too much. And also, for this purpose of this demonstration, I have this block demonstration. I've already drawn this for you, but just to explain what this is going to be, it is a block, or actually it's a drawing composed of several objects. You have a rectangle on the outside, and it is on layer 0. So focus in on that 0 is going to be important. That layer 0 is important for blocks. We have a circle that is on layer 1 with a unique color. These objects here, that diamond shape, is on layer 2 with a unique color. The next circle in is on layer 3 with a unique color. And layer 4, that just represents a piece of text, and that's also it's on its own layer. So blocks will be interesting the way they work with layering. And so they will take on certain aspects like color, layer, line type, and visibility. So you need to be aware of that as we get into that. So as we open up this drawing, I'll show you how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click back. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to close this. I'm going to go ahead and launch this drawing, and then we'll start to talk about this, and you guys can go ahead and follow that along with me too. So if you open this drawing, you will see it is uniquely, it's a rectangle, circle, another line, circle, and a piece of text, and uniquely it's separated out. So if I go in and freeze the layers, you can see how this is independent objects and how they work, okay? All right, so one thing that's very important is that 0 layer is going to play a real big functionality in blocks, as we'll see here in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about what a block is. A block is a way of creating an object or a group of objects primarily into a single object. And the reason you want to do that is because you'll have a lot of flexibility in what you can do with that block. It'll have independent layer visibility within it. It really completely drastically reduces the file size, particularly if it's a very complex type of object or group of objects. You can then also edit that thing very effectively, as we'll see. So if I have a bunch of blocks inserted in my drawing and I can make one change on that block, it'll instantaneously update all of those blocks within that. And the other thing that you can do with a block, which is very interesting, is it can have what are called dynamic properties, so that it can change sizes and shapes based on dynamic dragging stuff or keying in scale factors or those kind of things. Civil 3D uses that concept quite a bit. We will not be having time to deal with that too much for what we're doing, but it is something that you can do. The other thing that you can deal with in blocks is being able to give what's called textual information, called an attribute. And these attributes give that block more intelligence. So instead of just having a piece of text associated with that block, which really doesn't give it much intelligence other than what you read from it, a block can have other pieces of information associated with it that can then be extracted from the drawing and loaded into, like, say, a database or an Excel spreadsheet or something. So I'll kind of give you an example of how those things work here. So first of all, a block, like we said, usually is going to be what you might think of as a symbol. So for instance, you might think of a door in an architectural floor plan. Usually it's composed of a line and an arc that shows you where the door and the swing are. So if you have, let's say, a large building, such as the school, the college building, you literally probably have 500 doors plus in that building. So if you are drawing that in CAD and you're drawing a line and an arc, every time you're doing that, you're generating more data. So let's say you've got each door is composed of 10 objects or maybe more. So if I copy it once, now I've got 20 and then 30 and then 40 and then 50. And if you do that with 500 doors, you're going to get a lot of data associated with it. The other thing is all those objects are independent. So if you're trying to select a door really quickly, you have to make sure you get all the pieces. So that becomes a problem. So blocks allow us to create a single object, and then we have one object as opposed to all those objects, and it'll really drastically save space. The other thing is we can edit those blocks really effectively. So again, go back to my concept of 500 doors, and let's say you have that door drawn so that it's a 45-degree angle with an arc, but you actually want to have, let's say, maybe a 90-degree angle with an arc. So if you've already got 500 doors inserted in your drawing, you don't need to delete all of those and then go reinsert it 500 times. What you can do is just redefine the block from the old style to the new, and all of the blocks that are in your drawing will instantaneously update to the new specs. So we get that aspect. And then, like I said, if you put attributes on it, so for that door example, you might have, let's say, the size of the door is one attribute, the construction material that it's made of is one, another attribute, maybe the fire rating, manufacturer, cost. So all of these things can be attached to it, and they can be actually invisible so you don't even see them. But every time you insert that door, it's bringing that information in. And then if you want to do a cost estimate, you can rapidly go out and say, extract all the block information for the block door. It generates it into a spreadsheet file format. You can dump that into Excel. You'll have all your information and you'll have it in seconds. So lots of virtues to blocks. Okay, so for instance, right now, if I take this block, which is not a block, this group of objects, then if I do a copy, I just copy it here from, let's say, here to here to here. Those are just copies, but every time I'm doing it, if that's like 10 objects and I get 10 more, and 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Plus, if I want to edit this thing, it's all separate. And like I said, if I want to move it, it's a big deal. So that's not the way to go. Okay. So what blocks are going to do, allow us to group this together, and we have to give it two primary pieces of information. We have to give it what's called a name, and the name can follow any normal Windows naming convention, typically 256 characters, although there was a limitation on blocks at one time of 8 characters, and I've had problems with if you name blocks over a certain number of characters, or even if you use weird characters in your block names, they don't like to be inserted sometimes. So I try to limit it to like 8 characters. That was the old requirement. So I need to give it a name. I need to select the objects, and I also have to give it what's called a base point. And you can think of that kind of like the handle that you're picking this block up with and then moving it around. So it's one unique XYZ point. Blocks can also be three-dimensional. If you're using three-dimensional type block styles, the insertion point could be at one of the corners of a cube, for instance, or it could be in the middle. So it just depends on what you're establishing. So we're going to have a block name, we're going to select the objects, and then we're going to give it a base point, and ultimately then there's some other things that we can roll into this. So here's how easy it is to create a block. And again, notice also that we do have this layered out. So it will retain these layers as you create this block, but we're going to see something unique is going to happen with that 0 layer, okay? So if you have the Home tab active, or if you don't, make that active, and you'll notice there is a whole block section right here. That block panel has quite a few commands to it, but there's only a couple that we're going to take a look at. This one right here is your insert command. We've already used that. We've used it in a different form, but that's the insert command. There's how you create blocks right there. That's going to be our block creation tool. Let's see, there's your block editor. Well, I might show you the editor today, but we're not going to do much with it. And if we open this up, there is one here called base, which we'll take a look at. Now, the rest of these are primarily dealing with what we call attributes. So they're attribute commands associated with it, and we just don't have time to get into that. So we're going to create a block right now. So we've got our object, make sure everything's visible. And we're going to go to this command right here, create block. The actual name of the command is block. You just click on that and it should open up this dialog box, which I had a screen capture of for you. Okay. So there's some primary areas that we look at in this. The first thing we need to do is give it a name. Now blocks, like a lot of other objects that you create in AutoCAD, only exist in the current drawing. Okay, so if there are blocks in this drawing, if we open this up, they'll show up in this list, and notice my library is vacant. So what I'm going to do is we're going to call this block logo, and we're just going to assume that this is some kind of logo that we're going to create. So the reality is you can kind of call them anything you want, but I do make them descriptive. So if I'm creating a chair, I'm going to have a chair, window, door, whatever I would be using. And it's also not case sensitive, so don't worry about sensitivity there. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is supply a base point. So you can either click on that, or if you just go click here, pick point, what it'll do is take you right to this. So it allows you to pick on this with an O-snap of some kind. So if this is a logo block, for instance, you need to think about what makes a good base point. What makes a point that's going to be valid to bring it in with. So maybe a corner, one of the corners, or maybe that corner, or maybe even the center point. So I'm gonna use a center point O-snap and snap to the center of that circle. Okay. Now notice what it will do is it will come back with an XYZ coordinate value, which really doesn't mean anything. It's just with respect to your current UCS. Also, a thing to note, if you do not pick a point, there is a point already in there at 0, 0, 0. So you will get an insertion point whether you know it or not. And then that can be a problem when you're trying to insert things because it's not going to insert the way you want it to. Okay. So the next thing we do is we select the objects that we want to create blocks into. And also, if you have attributes, you need to make sure that your attributes are on before you create blocks and create it. Okay, so what we're going to do is go select objects here, and I'm just going to do this with a window to make sure I get everything. Okay, so once everything highlights, then I just hit enter, brings me back to that. And what's really kind of nice about this is it'll take a little snapshot of it, if you will, and it creates a little thumbnail up there. What you forget to select, though, will not be part of the block, and it's really kind of hard to add it after the fact, so you will just have to redefine your block if you forget it. So we have 3 options once we select it. We can either retain the objects as they are, just general objects. Now, in other words, I'll retain my rectangle, my circles, my lines, or I can convert what's sitting there into a block. So in other words, if I do convert, this is going to become a block once I execute this command. Or what I like to do is this last option called delete. And the reason I like to delete it, very often where I'm drawing my block isn't where I really want it to begin with. So I'm going to erase it anyway eventually. And the other thing is, what's nice about the delete option is that when you delete and execute this command, if everything doesn't disappear, you know you didn't create your block properly. So I always use this option right here. Okay. So the other things that you have are what's called behavior. Behavior, you have annotative. Excuse me. We haven't talked about annotative at all, but text objects, dimension objects, hatch objects, a lot of them are able to be what are called annotative. And what that means is they will recognize scale factors. And if they know that a certain scale factor they recognize, they will display in a viewport. But if they don't recognize that scale factor, they disappear in the viewport. So it's kind of a way of almost like freezing objects, even though they're not really frozen, they just disappear. So you can make your blocks annotative so that then you have scale factors associated with them. And that's kind of a cool thing. And a lot of the objects in Civil 3D are going to be what we call annotative. So again, that's going to have to do with when you're working in paper space viewports. So we're not going to worry about that today. So the other thing you have are these two options, scale uniformly and allow exploding. If you scale uniformly, what that means, you can only insert that 1-to-1. So this could not be 2 in this direction and then 1 in that direction. So that really limits your block when you insert it. So normally I'm going to say, just make that guy so that it can scale any way it wants to. And the other thing is, well, you typically do want to allow exploding, because if you want to edit that block, it's sometimes easy to explode it and then edit it. If you toggle allow exploding off, that's going to lock that block up, so you're not going to have as much availability to do anything with it. So the other thing are settings. You can have block units. I typically am going to go with a unit list, but you might be in inches or feet. If you go with a dedicated unit, that can screw you up when you're doing insertions. So you're usually better off going with a unit list setting, but that again can change depending on what your situation is. Now we can also add a hyperlink. So for instance, if we were drawing a door and it was Pella was your manufacturer, you could actually hyperlink, put a hyperlink on that block so that when you click on that hyperlink, it'll take you to Pella's web page, even to that particular door model. Okay, so that's also pretty cool. So when you create the block, you also have the option to open up the block editor right away, and you would just toggle that on. Okay, I don't normally do that, so we're not going to worry about that. So bottom line, what we need is primarily 3 pieces of information: the name, we need the insertion point or the base point, and we need to select the objects. Okay, so we got the name, we got this, so we should just hit OK, and you should see your block disappear. And if your block didn't disappear, it just means you didn't have that set on that option. So this block now exists uniquely into this drawing, and we can then start to use it now. If we go back to the block command again, that create, if you open this up, you'll now see you should have a block logo sitting in there. Okay, so any other blocks that we tend to create, they're going to show up in this as well. Also, if you have blocks that you are created in this drawing and you want to use them in other drawings, you do have the ability to export those out and then insert those back in. Okay. All right. So once we have blocks, we can start to insert them. And when we insert them, then they're going to come in as one object. Now we've already done this with our title blocks, so I kind of sidestepped the whole block issue. But the difference with the title block is that is what we call an external DWG file. So what you're doing is importing that DWG file into your drawing, and when it comes in as a block. So insert can be used to do 2 things. Insert can be used to insert internal blocks, or it can be used to insert external DWGs. But those are the only things that it'll work with, either a block or an external DWG. It can't be any other type of file type. Okay? So you have several insert commands. All right, so if you click this guy, which is pretty nice, he recognizes the blocks that are currently in your drawing, so it's real easy to use. So this is a nice command. I like this. The other one is over here, or if you just type in I for insert, it's going to pop up this guy, and you can also do it this way. And this one's a little bit hard to get used to, and they introduced this about 2 releases ago, and when they first put it in there, it kind of threw me for a loop, because this isn't the way I was normally used to doing it. But it does have all of the major options. So you can do it this way as well. Or you can type in what we call DD insert. If you type in DD insert, that stands for dynamic dialog box insert. This was the original block command. So this is what used to pop up as opposed to that other one. And this one's a little bit friendlier, I think, than this one. This one basically has all the options. So let's look at this one, because this is kind of cool. What this shows you is any blocks that exist in your drawing. Okay, if you're looking for blocks or DWG files, that's what this browse button is for. It allows you to go external and search a catalog of information to get DWGs. So when you insert a block, you basically can insert it with predefined locations, scale factors, and rotations, okay? And so notice if I toggle this on, it's going to allow me to float it where I want. If I toggle this off, it's going to lock that block in. It's going to bring that block in right at 0, 0, 0. Same thing with scale. Right now, this scale is set 1 to 1 to 1. If you want to change that, you can toggle this on, and when you insert it, it's going to ask you what scale factors you want to use. And the same thing with the rotation, okay? And rotations work like normal rotations. Your x-axis is 0. Positive rotation is going to go counterclockwise. Negative rotation is going to go clockwise. All right, so if you have this set up, we're going to leave those all toggled off, but you should see your blocks showing up here. And we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And let's see, where did it, oh, I didn't tell, so it went to 0, 0. So that's okay. You may have to zoom out. I should have toggled on the insertion. We'll do that on the next one. Okay, so one thing you'll notice right away is if you click on this guy, he's one object, okay? Now, let me ask or suggest something. If you've clicked on yours and you're only getting one grip, there's a difference in the grip settings. So let me show you something here. All right, so while you're in here, right click, go to options, and we're going to go to the selection tab. Under the selection tab, you will see show grips. And if you want to see grips in blocks, unique grips in blocks, you would toggle this on. So if I toggle this off and apply that, when I click on this block, the only grip I'm getting is, I'm only getting the insertion point grip, okay? But if you want to see all the grips that are associated with this, you go back to that and you turn them on. So this is useful to have that on like that, but sometimes it's too much. So I don't necessarily need all of these grips when I got it. So it just depends on what I'm doing, okay? So hopefully everybody got that to show up. So what we have is a block here, and you can see when you click on it again, it's all one object, all right? So now we're gonna start to see some unique stuff to this. This doesn't look any different than the other block right now. In fact, if I had the original drawing right next to this, you couldn't tell the difference other than when you click on it. So we're going to do something now with the layers. So we're going to take that layer, go from the 0 layer to layer 1. So layer 1 is the current layer, which is red. So now watch what happens when we insert this block. And we can just go up here to this insert, click that guy, and you should let us just pop him down, and you can just bring him down right next to him. And what you should definitely notice right now is that the outside border is no longer white. And the reason is this is a unique characteristic with block. So most objects and all objects really basically can only exist on one layer, okay? But blocks uniquely can exist on 2 layers. So this is called the insertion layer. That's the layer that they're being inserted on, but uniquely within this block, it has its own object layers. So you could think that, for instance, this circle is really on 2 layers simultaneously, the insertion layer and then the layer that it was originally created on. Now, what's happening with the 0 layer? 0 layer is a special layer for blocks, so that if you create any objects on the 0 layer, they will automatically float up to what the current layer is. So what's happening is this guy is actually on layer 1 right now, okay, that outside border, but the block itself is totally on layer 1 as well. Okay, so we're going to change this again. We're going to go to layer 2, and we're going to do another insert right next to it. And we'll notice now, okay, so everything is retaining its color scheme except for the outside border, because that was drawn on the 0 layer, and that's floating up. So in each case, we'll do that 2 more times. Go to layer 3, insert, bring him in, and do 1 more. Layer 4, insert, and there you have it. So that's kind of cool, because what that does, you can see actually I had different block looks based on the way I've aggregated that out. And you could put the whole thing on the 0 layer, or we could have them separate. So now watch what happens when we start to freeze layers. So Remember, this was inserted in layer 0, 1, 2, 3, and ultimately 4. So hopefully everybody's on layer 4 right now. I'm going to go in and freeze the 0 layer. So you'll notice that anything that was on the 0 layer froze. And again, these guys were originally on the 0 layer, but they're no longer on that 0 layer. They floated up. So watch what happens now if we freeze layer 1. Notice we lose that entire block because that was on the layer 1, but any other object in these other blocks that was associated with layer 1 is now frozen. And again, we can freeze layer 2, see the same thing happening. Ultimately layer 3, and I can't freeze that layer because it's actually a layer that has been current, okay? So if we thaw everything back, we can see how this is working. Okay, that's a pretty cool concept right there. And I very often will create a single, maybe multiple objects, but it'll be all on the 0 layer. And I do that specifically so that when I insert those blocks, I have ultimate control on what layer they're going to be on. So that's a very, very, very important principle. So let's see how to do the other insert, because this is a little bit trickier. So we're going to go to Insert I and hit Enter. And this guy should pop out for you. And it's like a palette. So you do have like other drawings or recent drawings. And you see all the blocks I've been dealing with. But in the current drawing, I only have one block. So that sometimes will disappear. So to use this, you can do a couple things. You can right click on that block and you can tell it to insert. You could also tell it to insert and explode, which I'm going to show you explode, but you don't normally want to insert a block exploded. And the other way is to just take that block and now pay attention to what's happening down here. Here's your scale factor settings, here's your rotation, and here's your explode. So toggle on the insertion point, and when we drag this over, we just drag it like that. And you can just place it anywhere you want. So I can place that one. And I can place another one if I want. So that's a pretty cool tool. It took me just a little getting used to, though, when I had that in there. Okay. So now think about this too. Like I said, if this was composed of 10 objects, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, if we were doing copies. But right now, since we have maybe 10 objects that compose this, then you have 10 plus 1 plus another one plus another one plus another one. So the size of my drawing has been reduced significantly based on this aspect. All right, so what happens if we make this block a non-block? And that process is called an explode. So you can do that a couple different ways. I can come up here to the Modify panel, select the explode, just come down here and select the block and then hit enter, and it exploded. Now, it may not look a whole lot different, but you'll notice right away is that this dropped back down to the 0 layer, and this is no longer a block. That's a polyline, that's a circle, that's a line, okay? Over here, notice, this is actually what's called a block reference, okay? And another way to do that is just select the object, hit the X key, and then hit enter, all right? So exploding blocks kind of defeats the whole purpose of blocks, so we don't normally want to explode blocks. That's the whole kind of idea and the whole concept with them, okay? The idea being that you can go in and edit those blocks as a block as opposed to blowing it apart, okay? So really, think of explode as kind of as a last resort if you really are messing with blocks. Leave them intact. Okay, so let's show you how we can do some scale factors and things. So there's a couple ways you can do this. When you insert a block, you can insert it with scale factors, or you can do it after the fact. So I'm going to show you both ways. So I'm not going to, let's maybe make we can leave the layer that we got up current. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to toggle on insertion point, and I'm going to toggle on scale factor, and I'm going to toggle on rotation. So what should happen is when I drag this over here, let's see, no, it didn't work. Okay, let's try this a different method. Let's do the DD insert. That's a little bit better. So if I go DD insert, So what I can do is I'm going to toggle this on. This should have worked. Hopefully this will. I'm going to toggle on scale factor, and I'm going to toggle on rotation. So I'm going to hit OK. It's going to allow me to place this. And you'll notice at the bottom of the screen, it now says, okay, what's your X scale factor? And you can also do a corner. So currently my X scale factor, if you look down here, it says it's set to 1. So if I set that to 2, then it wants to know what my Y scale factor is. So I can set the Y scale factor to 1, and then it wants to know a rotation, and I can drag it, or I can actually type that in. I could type in 30 degrees. So what we were able to do on this block is when we inserted it, we were able to change the scale factor in X, Y, and of course if it was a 3D block, you could do it in Z as well. And I can also change the rotation. So that's very handy. A lot of times you're not going to change your scale factors on your blocks, other than if you do scale them, you might scale them all by the same number, like 12 in the X, 12 in the Y, but you do have the ability to do what I just did. At one time in AutoCAD, if you brought this scale factor in not 1-to-1, so in other words, that was 2 and that was 1, that block would never be allowed to be exploded. But now you can do that. So in fact, if you notice what's happened, that's no longer a circle, that's actually an ellipse. And so that was part of the reason you couldn't make a circle into an ellipse in the old days, but that's been changed. Okay, so sometimes that's convenient. Sometimes it's more convenient to edit the block in place. So what we're going to do is we're going to do another block insertion. We're just going to do this here. And I'm just going to hit enter for the scale factor, enter again, and enter again. So I'm going to bring it in. So let's say I want to edit this block. Okay, so there's a couple of ways to edit it, but one of the easiest ways to edit it is via the properties. So if you click on the block and you right click, you can go to the shortcut, and down in this list you're going to find properties, usually at the bottom. So notice when properties opens up, you have all the different settings, the general, color, layer, line type, all of that good stuff. But if we go down to the geometry settings, these are dealing with the block itself. So notice XYZ position. What that's talking about is that point of the insertion point. So notice if I move that, that's changing actually. Okay, you can see that. So here's what's really cool. Scale factor X, scale factor Y, scale factor Z, and rotation. This is really handy. So if I want to change the scale factors, I just click in here and I just change it. Type in 2. Notice it elongated it in 2. If I want to make Y2, do that as well. 2. Rotation, 90 degrees or 0 degrees. Okay. So here's what's really cool process about blocks. If you want to mirror a block, in other words, if I want it to be rotated so this is backwards, so what I can do here is enter a negative for the scale factor. So instead of +2, I enter a -2, and what it did was it flipped that block. Okay, so I can enter it as a -2 in X and a -2 in Y, so you can mirror it in 2 different directions. And when you do insertions with things like doors and windows and those kind of things, that is a highly useful principle. So a negative scale factor is valid in a block. It just mirrors it in the opposite direction. Okay, just mirrors it in that opposite direction. All right, so this guy is the ultimate editing tool, or really the quick editing tool. Now they do have another editing tool. Okay, if you double click on your block, it will take you to this guy called your block editor. And if you hit OK, it opens this guy up and allows you to do all kinds of different things. This is where you can create what we call dynamic blocks, which have what's called a parameter, and then they have an action associated with them. So we really don't have time to get into that too much, but you are going to be utilizing dynamic blocks in Civil 3D. It's just that they've already been built for you. But this is a cool way to do it. And also, by the way, if you double click your block and you get into this thing and it's like, oh yeah, what did I do? How do I get out of this? All you have to do is come up here and it will close it for you. Okay. And if you make any changes, it will ask you at that point, do you want to make some changes to what you've got there in your block? Okay, so we've created blocks. They're really easy to create. We've inserted them. They're very easy to insert. Did a little bit of editing. When we inserted it, we were able to insert it with scale or rotation. And like I said, where you can edit it after the fact using properties. So what if we want to make changes to these blocks such that I've got, let's say, like we said, 500 of these blocks sitting somewhere in my drawing, and now I need to make a change. I don't want to go find all those blocks, delete them, and then reinsert them. That's a lot of time. That could be a whole day's worth of time, actually, depending on the complexity of the drawing and whatnot. So what I can do now is what we call redefining a block. And redefining a block allows me to essentially just create a new block and override the block that's in there. The key thing, or the key idea that you have to use when you do this process, is actually use the same name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take another block and insert it real quick off to the side. And I'm going to just leave it 1 to 1 and rotation 0. Okay, so it's going to be its normal block. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explode this block. So I'm going to go ahead and take that block and I'm going to explode it, because what we're going to do is I'm going to edit that. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to change this text. So that text is some unique weird text. I'm going to change that text to, let's see, maybe I'll do this. I'm going to go to properties and see what I got in terms of properties on that text. I have a style called standard. Oh, that's standard. Well, let's see what else we got in there. Let's see what style 1 is. Okay, there's style 1. All right, so I changed it to style 1, and now I'm going to change the contents. So I'm going to just have this say AutoCAD, okay? And that's a little big, so I'm going to edit that down. So I'm just going to have you guys make some changes. You can do whatever you want to this, but having a little bit of troubles with this. So my height's a little bit big. I'm going to make that 0.15. Okay, so that's more manageable. So now I'm going to do some other things. I'm going to draw some lines in here, and then I'm going to do some trims and stuff. So give me a sec here, and you can kind of just make any changes that you want to it that are going to kind of show up and be reflective of what you want to see. So I'm going to do some trims here. So I'm going to trim that out. Let's see. Usually I'm better at doing these kind of changes, and this one's taking me a little bit of time to do. I'm going to clean that up, clean that out, clean that out. I'm going to clean it out on this side, same way. I'm going to get that out of the middle of that, and I'm going to get rid of that, get rid of that. So I'm just make any change as a real visible change so that you can see something going on. Maybe I'll take this guy out here and that guy out here. So I'm changing the look of my logo, okay? So notice that's the original block. This is my changes, okay? So if you've taken a few minutes to do that, oh, looks like I got a little piece I'm going to trim here. That shouldn't be there. Yep. Get rid of that, just make sure everything, yeah, got another piece in here that I don't want. So I want to make sure I got everything that I need. All right. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to make this block the new block, and all of these that are in my drawing are going to update, okay? So we're going to go into the create command again. Now the key idea here is you have to use the same name, okay? So I'm going to use the name logo because what I want to do is overwrite logo with this new block settings. I'm going to create a base point. Now do be aware, I really kind of want to use the same base point, because if I don't use the same base point, these blocks are going to move based on where they are. All right, so I'm going to pick my objects, select objects, okay? And notice it's updated that. And I'm going to use the delete option. I'm going to allow exploding and leave everything else alone. So again, key thing here is when you redefine a block, you have to use the same name, okay? I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so AutoCAD recognizes the fact that I already have a block out in my drawing called logo. So it's going to ask me, do I want to redefine it? If I redefine it, it's going to update. If I say no, it's just going to dump everything. So what I want to do is say, yeah, redefine it. So notice what's happened here. All of the blocks that are in my drawing have now been updated to the new criteria. And that is a really, really key idea there. All right. Now I could have changed up layers and colors and all of that stuff, so it all would have reflected that. But everything that you see there is that way, and anything I insert now, it's using the new block reference, okay, not the old one. Okay, so hopefully you don't have any questions with that. All right, that's a good thing. All right, so let's talk about taking a block external out of the drawing file that we're working in. We maybe want to use this some other place, okay? Now there are a couple different ways you can do this in AutoCAD, but this is a nice way of exporting stuff, and actually you can export more than just blocks using this command. Unfortunately, AutoCAD seems to have gotten away from this. They do have something called Design Center that you can drag stuff. You can drag and drop from one drawing to the other. That's really convenient. But this allows me to export stuff out pretty easily as well. So the name of the command is wblock, and you can think what it means is write block, basically write block out to file, if you will. So what I'm going to do is type in the word wblock, because there's no other way to get to this command. Wblock, hit enter, and it will open up this dialog box for you. So let's look at this, because there's three key things here. So you can either write out a block itself. So if I click on this, I can select the block I want to export out, and it'll do that. The downside to this is if you have 50 blocks in this drawing, you have to do this process 50 times because you can't select them all at the same time. So there is that downside. So I can also do an entire drawing export. So this is pretty cool, because if you just do a save as, what you're getting when you do a save as is all the junk and garbage that's in your drawing gets saved over into the new file, okay? If you do an entire drawing wblock out, what it will do is it will purge out all of the junk in your drawing that is not being used. So for instance, if you have 50 layers in your drawing and you're only using 5 of them, you know, you've got 45 layers that are useless. So if I do a save as, I'm getting 50 layers. If I do a wblock, what it's going to do is it's going to look through that list of layers, and anything that's not being used just gets deleted. Same thing with anything that you would create that's considered a named object. So layers are considered named objects, dim styles, text styles, hatch patterns, anything that you're not using like that can be purged out. So this is really a cool process. And I use this a lot. I use this to clean up drawings, and it gets rid of junk. The other thing that's really cool is this one called objects. So this gives you the ability to go into a drawing and select just uniquely what you want to export out. So here's a good example. If you were working with, let's say, an architect that is maybe working on, let's say, our college, and you know, there's literally thousands of, I don't know, a couple hundred rooms at least in that building. I don't necessarily need to share the whole drawing file with the architect if all they're working in is, let's say, room 152. So what I can do is zoom in 152, just select the walls and all the stuff that's associated with room 152, and I can just wblock that out. So it's a way of just cookie cutter and take a piece out of it and then using that piece out. Okay, so in all cases though, when you do an export, if I export a block or export the entire drawing or export objects, what I get is a DWG file. Okay, so I'm going to go here, we're going to go to block just to show you this, and what it's going to do is it's going to ask me what I want to call it. Okay, so it automatically assumes, well, since the block is called logo, the DWG file should be called logo, and that's probably a good assumption. So I can tell it where to take this. So my desktop's a real mess. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dump it into a location so we can find this. I've got a folder for this class. It's called SUR 120. So I'm going to dump it in there. And when you get done with those locations, just go ahead and hit save. And then you're going to hit OK. And when you hit OK, you're going to see a little snapshot occur up in that corner, usually real quick. Okay. So nothing really happens. But if I minimize this and I go to my desktop, which again I said is a mess, if I go to here to that folder where I stored it, down in here, there should be a logo right there, logo .dwg file. And you can even notice the date is today's date with the time frame on it. Okay, so it's all there. So it's no longer a block, it's now a unique DWG file. So I go back into AutoCAD and I'm in business. All right. So I can now open that file. So if I go, let's say, to open, I can go to the folder that I'm in. There's my logo drawing. Go ahead and open it. And you notice it looks like it's a block, but it's not. It's just a normal, it's a rectangle, it's a line, it's a circle. Same layers are still there. Layers are still all good. Okay. But it's not, it's different. Okay. All right. So anything that you export is going to export as a DWG file. Anything that you import, which is primarily DWG files, if you insert DWG files, they come in as blocks that which you can then explode. Okay. So the other thing about inserting, which you need to be aware of, is that when you insert drawings into another drawing, if you have a conflict in, like, say, layer colors or layer names rather that have the same different colors, you can't have like layer 1 in one drawing that's green and layer 1 that's red when you insert it. So you can't have that. So what it will do is it's going to convert all of the colors in the imported drawing into what's the current layer setting scheme. So for instance, here's what I'm gonna take a look at. I'm gonna name this drawing. Well, let's see, I'm gonna save this drawing as a separate file. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go out here and I'm gonna change some color schemes up. So I'm gonna make, let's see, that layer, all right, and I'm changing the colors is what I'm doing. But I'm using the same layer names that already exist in the other drawing. That's the key thing to think about here. So, yeah, let's see. I want to go one more. Let's see. Let's change one more layer up. Let's change that to, well, let's make that green. Okay, so notice what I've done is this drawing called logo, this drawing that's called logo, has the exact same layers, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, as this drawing does. But the colors in here are different. So the colors in here are 1, 2, 3, and 4 for layer 1, 2, 3, and 4. When I go back to this one, I change that up. Okay. I'm going to save this drawing. I'm going to save it to the same location, but I'm going to call it logo X. Save. So when I insert this drawing, it cannot retain these same colors because there's going to be a conflict between that layer in this drawing and that layer in this drawing, okay? Because notice it's red and it's magenta in the other one, okay? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close this drawing and I'm going to insert it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the insert command and I can use this insert here, and what you do is you go to browse right there, that's your browse, and I'm going to navigate to the location of where that logo is, and that's under this guy. There's logo X. Notice the color scheme right there. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to bring this in and notice the color scheme now. And the reason is because if you have naming conventions, two layers that are named the same with different properties, or two pieces of text that are named the same with different properties, or anything that's named the same, the inserted drawing is going to lose, okay? And the base drawing that we're working in is going to retain all of those properties. And you will see that a lot, so you got to be careful with that. Now, if you insert a drawing that doesn't have information in the parent or the base drawing, that information then gets incorporated into it, okay? So if I had layer, let's say 5, 6, 7, and 8 in this other drawing that got inserted, there's now a drawing, there's a layer 5, 6, 7, and 8 in here if that's the case, okay? So you do kind of have to watch those things a little bit. All right, so we're going to take a look at another command that's kind of a older style command. It's called minsert, and it stands for multiple insert. So when you multiply insert a block, what you're basically doing is generating what's called a rectangular array. So the problem with this rectangular array is going to be basically static, and it cannot be exploded, and so therefore it cannot be easily edited. So probably a better way of doing an array with a block is to actually use the array command. That's kind of my opinion on that. But again, this is not something that you're going to use all that often. So what we're going to do is go in and type in the word minsert. Minsert. And it wants to know what block to bring in. So I'm going to bring in my logo block. And then you just pick a point, and it's going to want to know it's going to know what your spacing is, or your scale factor. So I'm going to say scale factor in the X is 1, scale factor in the Y is 1, rotation is 0. Now it then wants to know the number of rows. So rows are going to go in this direction. So I'm going to say, let's say 3 rows, and columns would go left to right. So I'm going to say 5 columns. So the unit spacing between those is the distance between that corner to that corner in the column, and it would be from that corner to the next corner in the row. So our block is 2 inches big, so I need to be at least 2 inches between rows and columns. So I'm going to put 2.25 in the rows and 2.5 in the columns. And notice there's your array. So 2.5 went from here to here. There's your half unit. And this is 2 1/4 this way. So notice it's kind of neat. It's a block. If I click on it, it's all one block, but I can't really edit it. So if I try to explode it, it basically just laughs at you and it says one was minserted. So what that means from your standpoint is that you cannot edit it. That's the whole process. Okay. So not much you can do with it. Now I could edit the base parent block. So if I edited that block, exploded it and redefined it, that would redefine, but I could never really do anything with it. I don't even think, if I go to properties, I don't think properties will let me do anything. Well, there's a scale factor. Let me see if we can change that. Maybe we can. Oh, there's columns. So you can do some edits. So if I go here and I want to make that 6 columns, yeah, I can add columns. And I can change spacings, but that's about it. So there's not a whole lot you can do to that, okay? And again, you can never explode that. All right, so that's called minsert, which stands for multiple insert. Like I said, if I'm going to do that with a block, I'm probably going to use the array command. That's this guy right here, because I have a lot more flexibility with the array command. And the array command also takes and groups your object into an array object, so it does kind of give you the best of both worlds. The difference is that this is going to be, that's essentially just one object. So an array object is going to be a little bit more complex. Okay, so let's take a look at one more thing, and this is called the base command. So the base command is used so that when you insert a drawing into another drawing, it uses that point as your base point. So let's go back to that logo drawing we made called Logo X. So right now, this drawing thinks that the base point is at 0, 0, 0. So if I want this point there to be the base point, or maybe that corner to be the base point, I can do that by just typing in the word base. And you'll notice there's 0, 0, 0. And I would just pick with an O snap the new location, maybe the center. And so it's fixed that now as the base point. So when I insert this block, or I insert this drawing into the new drawing file, what that does is that just makes it easier that way. Okay. So if I go to the base command, you'll see that it's actually a new value there. You can see, well, actually it isn't, because I guess that was already sitting at 0, 0. Let me change that. Let me change it to, let's say, that point right there. So if I go back into the base, you'll see that's got different coordinates values. So this is where this would be useful, like for your title blocks. So you have your title block. Let me see if I can find a title block here. I can open up real quick. Okay, so there's a title block right there. So right now, if I wanted to make that the corner of my insertion point, it's probably not there unless that happens to be 0, 0, 0. Let me ID that real quick. Yeah, that is. Okay, so if you set that corner at 0, 0 and you don't set your base, you got a good base point. But let's say I want that corner to be for my title block. I would go to the base command, set it to that point, and then save it. And what's going to happen is every time I insert it, it's going to use that point as the insertion point. So it's not like a big deal most of the time, because you can always move your block around really easily once you get it into your drawing, but that just helps speed things up. So base point is useful, but remember, if you don't set a base point, you're going to have a base point. It's going to be 0, 0, 0. Okay. All right. So all that stuff we just talked about is what we're going to be utilizing for this fourth assignment. We talked about constructing walls and all of that today. So you guys can get started on that. And then we will finish up with some of this stuff on Wednesday's class that's coming up, that will basically be creating blocks, and then we'll be able to insert those. So just to give you guys a heads up, some of you guys that might want to kind of work on this ahead of time before we get to Wednesday. Under the assignment, we go to the assignment. I gave this out today, and the piece that was missing from most people's stuff is, well, we started drawing this, some of you, and you're going to have that as the second sheet, but this was the sheet that was missing. So we're going to construct all these blocks and inserting them into the drawing. So we're going to have appliance blocks. You're going to have a sink and a vanity, toilet, refrigerator, tub, and range. And you're going to construct these in real world units. So 24 by 36, just as you see. You might not be able to see it, but on there I have a suggested insertion point. There's a little plus right there. There's a little plus right there. Little plus right there, because those are going to be suggested on how you bring them in. So the appliance blocks, they're going to come in at the different locations here, and they don't have to be scaled. So they should be brought in at 1 to 1. So the doors and the windows, the way we're handling that, that's a kind of a unique thing. We're creating one door, and you'll notice when we get to like this drawing here, there's multiple doors and they're all different sizes. So for instance, that number 2 door is 2 feet 6 inches, where a number 1 door is a 3-foot door, and a number 3 is a 2'4". So you have really 2 ways of doing this. You could create 3 different blocks based on those sizes, and then you just insert them, and you may have to rotate them or mirror them. This, by the way, is where rotation and mirror works really effectively. But what I'm going to show you down here is a way of creating what's called a 1 unit by 1 unit block, and then this just allows you to scale it up to the unit you want when you insert it. So for instance, what 1 unit by 1 unit means literally is this is going to be 1 inch by 1 inch, okay? So that when I insert my door up here, that's going to be a 3-foot door, I'm going to use a scale factor of 36 in the X and 36 in the Y. And this thing will just conform right to the scale factor that I need. when I do my 2'6" door, I'm going to convert that to inches, and then I would insert that the value. Okay, so that works really slick. This is called a 1-unit block, and I'm going to do that for the doors and the window. Now the window is a little bit unique, so I want you to look at this, and I'll talk about this a little bit more on Wednesday with you guys as well. But just to give you the idea, rundown, if you want to try this. This is basically from this side to this side is your wall opening. Okay, so the Y unit is your wall opening, and this distance, I guess I shouldn't say wall opening, it's really the wall thickness. Okay, so this should be basically 5 inches, although you're going to not draw it 5 inches, you're going to draw it 1 inch. And then this is also going to be drawn as 1 inch, but this will be the size of the window opening. Yeah, so the X is the window opening, and the Y is the wall thickness. And notice that's where my insertion point is, right there. So when I insert this window, let's say window A is a 2-foot opening. So it's a 2-foot opening and a 5-inch wall thickness. So when you insert this block, 2 feet is 24 inches. So the X scale factor will be 24. The Y scale factor will be 5. And what it'll do is it'll insert that very nicely in there for you. Okay. So when we come up here, the C, that's a 4-foot. So that's going to be 48-inch opening by 5-inch wall. So again, we can create a bunch of different windows, or you can just use this and insert it and increase it anytime you need to. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to create these blocks. We'll also pay attention in the instructions. What it tells you to do with these blocks is to create them where you're going to insert them on layers. So you're going to have a block 1 that you're going to create on a that's going to be your layer, and you're going to make it blue, and you're going to have a block 2 layer, and you're going to make that also blue. But your appliance blocks go on the block 2 layer, and your door and window blocks go on the block 1 layer. Okay, so that will be pretty straightforward. But when you create the blocks, what you want to make sure that you do is that you draw them on the 0 layer. Okay, draw them on the 0 layer so that when they get inserted, they'll show up blue. And then also, for instance, the appliance blocks are here in this viewport, but that layer is frozen. And when we get to this viewport right here, the appliance blocks and the doors and window blocks, they're all showing up. Okay, so everything's there, and it's all straightforward. All right, so hopefully there's no questions. I will be again out of town until Monday. So hopefully I'll have this posted for you on Monday. And if you have questions, you can shoot me some questions. I'll be available definitely by Tuesday, and then Wednesday we'll plan on hopefully creating these blocks, finishing this process off. Next week will be our test, and then we'll be moving in eventually then to Civil 3D, where a lot of this you're going to start to see again as well. Okay, so hopefully this goes smoothly, and like I said, if not, I'll talk to you guys all next week.